Welcome to the part 9 of our React course series. In this part, we'll see how we can integrate forms in our React application. We'll understand the difference between control versus uncontrolled component, and we'll look at some of the popular libraries that goes very well with hooks for integrating these forms very easily in our production level React apps. So we have styled our application. We are rendering a list using data from a remote data source, and we have applied animations as well. Now in this part, let's go a step further and learn about how we can use HTML forms in React and how we can bring the goodness of React into the forms. So first of all, let's understand about something called as the controlled versus uncontrolled components in React. So for example, let's introduce a sort of input box here, and when you type something in it, it'll filter the list of these users based on the characters you have entered by comparing them to the usernames of the users. So let's create one search box component, and simply let's import React from React, and let's return an input element wrapped inside a div here. Input type search, which is similar like text, but it adds a little cross button to clear off the search, clear off the text that we might have added. And that is it. So we have created our search box component. Now let's refer it inside our user list component. And just above where we are rendering the list, we'll reference the search box component. And let's see how it looks. So it looks like a normal text box, and we can type in it. Let's just give it some style. So we have our search box here, and now when I enter something in it, for example this, it is updating the value or state of that input box component or the HTML component that we see. So this is how normally forms work in JavaScript, right? So there's this internal state that the browser maintains for all the input elements, all the form elements in JavaScript. But in React, so such a kind of component out of the box is called as the uncontrolled component. That is, React is not controlling any bit of it. So it's just updating on its own. But when we associate the React state with a given form element in HTML, that's when it becomes a control component. What I mean is, so any component which accepts a value and an onChange handler in order to notify when that value changes in response to some user event, and we take the responsibility of changing the value by ourselves in React realm, it's called as the control component. So let's see what I mean by that. So inside the users list component, suppose I create another state variable that is empty initially, and that says search text, which is just like a getter and setter for the search text that we are going to create. And let's say I assume this search box now takes a value as an input of search text, and on change I'm passing a function, let's say handle search input change. So I'll create this change handler here, and it will take an event, and based on that I'll update the search text e.target.value, right? And here inside my search box component, I'll accept these two properties. I can destructure them right away as value and on change. And now if I pass these things to my input component here, we can now control the value of we can control the initial value, or suppose there was a button here, on click of that button I can dynamically change the value of this input box. So this component, this input element is no more uncontrolled. It's now in the control of the React component state. So this state variable is now bound to this. So which means now we will have to make sure that our state variable changes. So for example, if I don't do this right now, my state won't change and it won't even reflect on my screen. So see, I'm pressing the characters, but nothing is happening. That's because now the fate of the value that will be shown here now depends on us. So we have to responsibly change the search text whenever the user changes it. And the initial value here is blank. So suppose I enter param here, and now if I see initially it will show me param, and now if I'll change it, it will reflect here. Okay, so that was about the control component. Now we have the reference of the search text. Now we just need to bind it to our list here in order to filter them out. So let's do that. So it'll be inside the logic will go inside our handle search input change function. Now here we can filter our list. So as you can tell, we might have to create another state variable called as filtered users. So we keep the original users in a separate bucket and filtered users in a separate bucket, so that when the user types nothing, when for example the user typed this and he suddenly cleared the search of here, we want to restore the original users list. So it's better to keep these in separate buckets hence. And instead of showing mapping over the users, we'll map over the filtered users, which are going to be displayed. So by default, when we set the users, we'll also set the filtered users as well, because initially there's no way we'll come here, and only in response of this network call we want to set filtered users to full users. And when the user types something, we grab the reference of that text. Let me take it out here and let me update the search text so that the input gets updated, as well as I want to update my filtered users. And the way it happens is you can pass some, let's say, const results, let's say, equals to my original users dot filter. So it's an array. We can apply the dot filter method of the array and user, and if you can tell if the user dot includes, so it's a string operator which checks whether the text is included in that particular string, and it will match any of those, and we have the results here, and we can set the new results back. And maybe here we can apply this check which says if the text is equals to blank, then we want to restore the filtered users back to users. Let's see, there's a typo. So initially the filtered users are rendering all the list, all the items. So the user item is an object and it holds a property called as login, with which we want to compare our text against. So let's see it again. So now let's say defunct, yep. And if I type K, so all the users which have the K letter in their username will show up. Same goes for it. And if I remove any character at all, or I press this close icon that's available by the virtue of input type search, if I click here, it'll restore my list back to the normal list of users. So that's a very simple example we saw for how we can consider control components in our application. Now it's a very simple example. Let's move one step further. In order to use forms in your application, in your large scale application, it becomes imperative to use a lot of concepts of handling forms. For example, handling the validations or checking if the form is dirty, which means that the form has been touched or some values have been changed in that form, or you want to conditionally render some other component based on the value of a given component. So all these things become very cumbersome, and it's required that you use some of libraries alongside React. So other frameworks like Angular, they come along with their, for example, ngForm is one module in that, but React is a library, it's not a framework, so you'll have to choose, you have flexibility of choosing whichever form library that you want to use. So for example, Formic is one that's really popular, but this one, React Hook Form, is something that I found recently, and it goes very well aligned with the new hooks kind of syntax that we write, and it offers all the features. So let's see it by a very nice example we have here. So installation is very simple, npm install react hook form, and let's see the syntax. So this is how our basic form looks like. It's nothing but a form with these labels and input elements, and we have to make sure that we apply a name to each and every input element. It's very imperative that we do that, because based on that the output will generate the form values, form keys, key value pairs. So those keys are taken from this name field that we provide here. So the usage is very simple. We import the useForm hook, and basically we call it, and we get two methods out of it. It's called as register and handle submit. Now it gives us the flexibility of including what we want to be a part of our form. What I mean by that is, so for example, I have 10 input elements here, and out of that, for example, I want the first name to be a part of this form. So simply by registering that element to that given form using ref equals to register, I'm making that element as a form element as a part of that form. So same way, I have the last name, and there's a checkbox, and again there's one email input. And when I click submit here, the form gets submitted, and this method gets, you need to call this method, and it accepts a callback, which is just alerting the contents of this form. So for example, I have this, check this, and let's submit it. So you get all the details here. So for example, first name, last name, is developer, yes, email is this, okay. So all the keys are taken from the name of these input elements, and all the values are of course taken from the values. So one thing you have to make sure, so for example here, these are the already existing native input elements. Now chances are while making big projects you will introduce your own custom form elements. So you have to make sure you follow the contract. The contract is any input element, any form element should have these two mandatory props, and those are called as value and onChange. So all of these input elements, they have this contract. The input type name accepts a value, and it accepts a onChange as well. Let's see what else we can do here. So of course this is a very contrived example. So for example, let's look at the validations. So for example, if you want the register, if you want the first name to be required, so you can say required :true. And now if you try to submit the form without entering the first name, so it doesn't let you submit the form, and all the errors, all the validation errors, it exists on this property that's returned by this hook called as errors. And you can apply a conditional check here, errors dot first name. First name is the name of the field on which the error happened, and you can say something like, in a paragraph just below it, errors dot first name dot message. So you'll see if I try to now submit, and we have an error. So there's no message, but we can pass a message instead of a boolean. For example, first name is required. So there's a custom string that we can pass, and that will be shown here if I don't pass anything and try to submit, right? And you can pass multiple errors here. For example, max length. So if you don't want the first name to exceed, let's say, 5 characters, you can. So now the required flag is passed, but the max length character is not. So we get this error here. Now again, if you want to pass the message here, so you'll have to use this object notation which says value is 5 and the message is, so you can break it down to these two things. Max chars allowed are 5, right? Same way you have min length, max length, and you can even specify some custom regex pattern if that's a need. So say you are grabbing phone numbers and you don't want people to enter any string inside those phone numbers, so you can apply this regex right there and say it can only be digits, although it doesn't make sense for our first name, but for the sake of discussion we are using this. And if I now click submit, so first of all, let me reduce it and now submit again. Now it will show it can only be there. So it will show one error at a time, even when there are multiple errors. That can be controlled. The find control is available. So you can check that in the docs. The other thing is, if you want to possibly, while we are discussing this, so as you can see, these validation errors are only available when you hit the submit button, right? And maybe you don't want that. You want the validation errors just to be there when you just simply change one of the values. So you can control that by using these 3 modes it has. By default, it's on submit. That is, the validations or checks on the values of the form elements will happen only when the user submits the form. You can change it to on change or on blur. So on change means whenever the user is even changing. So now it is more reactive, but it takes a toll on the performance, because with every keystroke now the validation checks will happen. But this is more nicer and intuitive way of telling the users right away the information that they might be entering is wrong. So that is really helpful and very easy with this useForm library, which otherwise is a little laborious or full of effort to work on. And other thing you might want to have here is add some default values. So you might want to, for example, initialize this is a developer check with true, and which is developer. So let me pass this is developer as true, and maybe the last name as, so you have to make sure you match the input name, the name key here, because that exactly will be worked against. Let's say the last name is Singh, and now this is checked and this is Singh. So that's about the default values, which is very easy here. Also, while we are here, there's one thing that's worth discussing. It's called as a form state. So that's a general jargon of form state that we talk about when we talk about forms. So for example, at any given point of time, your form will have some state, some meta state. So if I just log it out here, and you can see these logs here. What this means is, so initially my form looks like this. It has the default values as Singh, and as soon as I make some change, right? So for example, it was checked, this checkbox, and I clicked it accidentally. So this is the form state object that's getting logged, and let's see what it is saying. It's saying is dirty true. Is dirty means that the form holds some values which it wasn't holding when it was first rendered. So the form has been touched by people. The form values have been manipulated. And is submitted as false. We haven't yet submitted the form, but if I do, let's see. Again, this is not submitted because there was some error. So all of these meta states are present here, and these could be very useful when you want to conditionally apply some UI elements. So for example, right now the state is that it has some errors, and all those errors are listed here. The first name has this error of type required because I tried to submit form without it, and the dirty fields are is developer true. So the field that I changed purposely in this form was is developer, so that is present here. And if I change another, like if I change from Singh, if I remove the H, so again is dirty is true, and the dirty fields are now is developer and last name. Same way, it's saying is valid is false because this first name is required and I haven't provided it one name, and max characters are allowed for. So it can never be valid considering the amount of validations I've applied, some unrealistic validations for the demonstration purpose. But now this form looks valid. Now the state is dirty is true and is valid is also true, which means now if I'll submit, it'll get submitted. And let's see the state right now. So the submit count is 1, is valid is true, and is submitted is also true. So I've submitted this form one time. So all these kind of checks are useful and you don't have to worry about maintaining those. Otherwise, if you don't use such libraries, you have to keep track of these things. And while working with very large projects, you'll find them really useful. So there are plenty more such things, such useful features, like watch is one of them. So for example, if you want to watch or listen to one of the elements values in the form, and which could then manipulate the rendering of a certain other components. For example, here we are watching this checkbox which says show age. So if user checks that show age checkbox, we want to show some other element. So based on that condition, we can apply conditional renders here. And similarly, if you want to imperatively or programmatically set the value, basically on the click of a button, you want to set the first name value to something. So you can control that here without even dirtying or changing the validation status. So that level of control you can have with such kind of libraries. So this seems like a complete package to me, and I've used it in one of my projects as well. So it's worth having a look. So that was about React Forms. In the next part, we'll be discussing about one of the very important concepts in React called as React Context, and we'll see its applications.